which has our character with that custom character mesh and animations all set up. So throughout your history, you're going to see all the different pushes that you made. And so like I said, you want to do this after it. So you can revert back to a previous version. That way you don't have to do the entire, you don't have to watch this entire course again. You can just pick up back where you left off. So again, this is super important, especially when you're working on large project, or if you have to collaborate with other people on a project, or if you're working on a commercial game. Very important that you have the game backed up, because if it gets corrupted and you don't have anything else, then there's really not much that you can do. So that's pretty much it for this lecture, and that wraps up this first chapter, which is basically just getting started, getting you up to speed with creating this survival game. In the next chapter, we're going to logic related to what we needed to do. Now, inventory systems can get quite complex, so that's why I'm starting it off super simple. We're going to start by first creating a basic item, and then we're going to create some UI so that we can see what it looks like on our screen. And we're going to work our way down to essentially just dragging and dropping an item on our player's hotbar to equip a hatchet. That's basically the goal of this chapter. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So right click and add a new folder. We want to name this Blueprints. So we're going to use the blueprints for all the different blueprints that we create. And in here, we want to create a new folder and name this Genomes. Now what we want to do is go ahead and open that up and right click, and under the Create Advanced Asset here, we have Blueprints. At the very bottom, we have this enumeration. So you can see in that little tooltip, that white tooltip right down there, it says an enumeration is a list of named values. So if you remember when we were talking about variables, basically an enumeration is just a option to name. So if we create an enumeration here, we're going to go ahead and give this a name. We're going to name this e_item type, and double click to open that up. Now, one thing I want to discuss real quickly is every time we open up a window, it opens up like this rather than being docked in our main editor here. So I want to change that because it's kind of annoying having to dock every single window up here. So we go to Edit, Editor Preferences. Down here under the Asset Editor Open location, we change this to Main Window. So every time we open something up, we'll just open up in this main window. Okay. So in our item type, and double click to open that up. Now, one thing I want to discuss real quickly is every time we open up a window, it opens up like this rather than being docked in our main editor here. So I want to change that because it's kind of annoying having to dock every single window up here. So we're going to Edit, Editor Preferences. Down here under the Asset Editor Open location, we change this to Main Window. So every time we open something up, it will just open up in this main window. Okay, every single window it opens up like this rather than being docked in our main editor here. So I want to change that because it's kind of annoying editor open location. We change this to the main window. So every time we open something up, it will just open up in this main window. Okay. So in our item type, basically an enumeration is a user-defined setting option. So what we can do is add enumerator here at the top. So we can add 5 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so these enumerators, we can change this display name here to resource. because this is an item type. So we're going to have the different types of items here. So we have a resource, we have a equipable, we have an armor item type, and then we have a consumable, and then we have a buildable. So basically these are just user defined by us. And now what we can do is we can use this enum to select, what type of item this is. So if you haven't messed around with enumerations, in our character here, in the variables, we can add this enumeration that we just created. So if we add a plus for the variable test enum, bring it back real quick, and change this boolean to our e underscore item type enum. So it'll be this little green one right here. This is. So if we add a plus for the variable test enum, just name it that real quick, and change this boolean to our e underscore item type enum. So it'll be this little green one right here. So if we compile and save this, in our default value, you're going to see we have, so it'll be this little green one right here. So if we compile and save this, in our default value, you're going to see we have this drop-down menu now. So we have a resource, equipable, armor, consumable. So that's all that an enum is, right? It allows us to create these custom options, and then we can use it to select the different types of options, okay? So I'm going to delete this. We don't actually need that inside of our character. But we're just creating all the enums that we're going to use for our item info. So we created our item type. The next thing that we want to create is our item rarity enumeration. So right click, add a blueprint enumeration renamed e underscore item rarity. Well, options, okay? So I'm going to delete this. We don't actually need that inside of our character. And double click to open that up. We're going to add a rarity enumeration. So we created our item type. The next thing that we want to create is item rarity enumeration. So right click, add a blueprint enumeration. This will be named e underscore item rarity. And double click to open that up. We're going to add 5 different enumerators. And for our different item rarities, you can come up with a rarity enumeration. So right click, add a blueprint enumeration. This will be named e underscore item rarity. And double click to open that up. We're going to add 5 different enumerators. And for our different item rarities, you can come up with whatever different names that you want, but we have common, so you have like a common item, then you have uncommon, rare item, epic, and then a legendary. So these are different item rarities. So you'll have a common item, uncommon, then it goes up to rare, epic, and then legendary. So you can use different names if you wanted to, but for now this will do. So this enum will control how rare an item is, depending on what we set it to. The next thing, or the last enumeration that we want to create, is go to blueprints, enumeration, and we're going to name this e underscore armor item. So we open this up. This will be the different armor types that we have, or the different, basically the different clothing slots that our character has. So we're going to add 4 of these, And the first one's going to be named helmet. The next one is going to be named chest. The third one will be pants. The last one will be boots. Now again, you could have more of these, but we're going to just stick to 4 because the way that this character is designed is boots. Now again, you could have more of these, but we're going to just stick to 4 because the way that this character is designed is, well, the character comes with a t-shirt, different modular clothing pieces, so it has like pants, boots, a shirt, and all that stuff. And so that's why we have it set up like this. Alternatively, you could add more different, you could have like gauntlets, you could have like a belt, or more different armor types. It just depends on what type of character model you're using, if you have all the different assets to go with it. So this will do for now. So we've created all these different enumerations, which are basically, user-generated options for us. Now we're going to create the actual item, the item data, or the item info. And so in our blueprints folder, we're going to create a new folder, and this will be named structures. Now in our structures folder, we're going to right click, and under the blueprints we have, under the enumeration, a structure. So if I click on structure here, I'm going to name this to s_item info. Now if we open this up, all that a structure is basically a group of variables. So right now you see we have a boolean here. We can add another variable and we can change this to a string. And so this can be just a random group of variables. And basically a structure is like a variable that we can add inside of our character. And so for this particular structure, we want to create all the variables that will define our item. So the very first one that we want to create here, the very first variable that we want is an integer. And the name is going to be a item ID. So we're going to use item IDs for all our different items. Then click add new variable, and this will be another integer. We're going to name this to item quantity. So how many items do you have in the stack? We'll add another variable, and instead of an integer, this is going to be a texture 2D. So down here, we want this texture 2D, okay? And an object reference. And so this will be our item icon. So this will be like the icon of the item. So it'll be like a little picture of our hatchet, or whatever type of resource like wood or stone. Add another variable here. We're going to change this to a text. And we're going to name this to our item name. Okay, so we're going to have a text to store our item name. Add another variable here. It'll be text as well. We'll have an item description, or DSC, for short for description. In this variable, you can add, so how many items do you have in this stack? We'll add another variable, and instead of an integer, this is going to be a texture 2D. So down here, we want this texture 2D, okay? And object reference. So this will be our item icon. So this will be like the icon of the item. So it'll be like a little picture of our hatchet, or whatever type of resource like wood or stone. Add another. So this will be our item icon. So this will be like the icon of the item. So it'll be like a little picture of our hatchet, or whatever type of resource like wood or stone. Add another variable here. We're going to change this to a text, and we're going to name this to our item name. So we're going to have a text to store our item name. Add another variable here. It'll be text as well. We'll have an item description, or DSC for short for description. In this variable, you can add a description of what the item does, so the player knows what the item is used for. Add another variable. We're going to change this to an integer, and we're going to name this to item damage. So how much damage does the item do? Depending on the item type, we may or may not use this. So for example, for a weapon, we're going to use the damage, but for like a consumable, we're not going to use the damage. We'll add another variable here, and this will be our enumeration that we created. So type in E_item rarity. So we want this E_item rarity enumeration that we created. We'll name this item rarity. So we'll define how rare this particular item is. Add another variable here and change the type to integer. And for the name, we'll change this to item cur HP. So item CUR HP. So this is our item's current health. We will add another variable and leave it as integer and name this to item max HP. Okay, so we're going to use this variable to store the current HP of an item. So for example, if you have a hatchet, you're going to start out with 100 HP. Every time you swing the hatchet and it hits something, items cur each particular item is. Add another variable here and change the type to integer. And for the name, we'll change this to item cur HP, item CUR HP. So this is our item's current health. We will add another variable and leave it as integer and name this to item max HP. Okay, so we're going to use this variable to store the current HP of an item. So for example, if you have a hatchet, you're going to start out with 100 HP. Every time you swing the hatchet and it hits something, it's going to subtract 1 from that HP. That way they have durability and the items aren't indestructible. Add another variable here. This will be of the type Boolean. And we're going to name this to is stackable ? So this will determine whether or not this item can be stacked or if it can't be stacked. So, for resources, you'd have like 100 wood per stack, and then you have weapons which aren't stackable. Add another variable here. We're going to change this to an integer, and we will name this to stack size. So you can determine how much this item stacks by. And I think throughout this course, we're just going to use 100 per stack as the stack size. Of course, you can increase it as you want. And of course, for weapons, we would make the stack size like 1 and whatnot. Add another variable here. We're going to change this to a enum that we created. So type in E_item item type. So e underscore item type, and we'll just name this to our item type. So we'll determine what type of item this is, if this is a resource, clickable, and this will help us later on when we use the item. That way we know what to do with it. Add a new variable here. For this, we actually need to create something real quick. So real quick in our content browser here, we want to type. So we'll determine what type of item this is, if this is a resource, clickable, or and this will help us later on when we use the item. That way we know what to do with it. Add a new variable here. For this, we actually need to create something real quick. So real quick in our content browser here, we want to go in our blueprints. We want to make a new folder in here and name this items. And in our items here, we want to create a new blueprint class, and we're going to choose the actor. So this is going to be our item master blueprint class that I was talking about. We'll just name this to BP underscore item master. So save that file, save all. And in our S item info, we add a new variable here. We're going to change this to our BP underscore master item master. And instead of using the object reference, we're going to use the master blueprint class that I was talking about. So we'll just name this to BP underscore item master. So save that file, save all. And in our S item info, we add a new variable here. We're going to change this to our BP underscore master item master. And instead of using the object reference, we're going to use the class reference, because we're going to create children or child blueprint classes. So things like, our weapons, pickaxe, all the different types of tools. We're going to create those classes, and whenever we set up the different items, we can set up the reference to that class so that we can spawn it in the level. So name this to item class reference, or just item class ref short. We'll add another variable, and this will be the type e underscore armor type, the last enumerator that we created. And just rename this to armor type. And then we'll add another variable here, and this will be a boolean. We'll name this to use ammo question mark. So this will be for our weapons if this item uses ammo. Add a new variable here and have an integer and name this to current ammo. Add another new variable, make sure that's integer, and name this to max ammo. So those are the different item variables that we need for a single item. So this will allow us to create a wide range of items, and it will allow us to define things like the item ID, the name of the item, description, icon, what type of item it is, and all that sort of stuff. So we're all done with our S item info. We can go ahead and close that. And now let's go ahead and add our very first item. So before we go ahead and do that, let's go ahead and head over to the marketplace, and we're going to, so we're all done with our S item info. We'll go ahead and close that. And now let's go ahead and add our very first item. So before we go ahead and do that, let's go ahead and head over to the marketplace, and we're going to get some item icons that are free. So search for craft resource icons. So if you search for craft resource icons and filter by free, you're going to see we have these icons here. And so these are over 200 different item icons, and they're actually really high quality and detailed. So we're going to use all of these throughout our course. You know, we can use things like the wood, the rocks for all the different resources. We have things like, so these are, and we're going to get some item icons that are free. So search for craft resource icons. So if you search for craft resource icons and filter by free, you're going to see we have these icons here. And so these are over 200 different item icons, and they're actually really high quality and detailed. So we're going to use all of these throughout our course. You know, we can use things like the wood, the rocks for all the different resources. We have things like iron that we can use, berries. So you can add many different types of items. So go ahead and check this out and add a project. Add it to Survival Craft. And so now that we've added it here, you can see 432 changes added to source control files. Would you like to import it? Just click import it. Then it might need to apply a little bit of shaders there, so we'll give it here a second. So in our craft resource icons, textures, we have all these nice high quality icons that we can use for the different items that we want. So let's go ahead and create our very first item. So in our blueprints here, we're going to create a new folder and name this to data tables. So a data table is sort of like an Excel file. If you've ever used like Microsoft Excel, it's the same sort of thing. It will allow us to create sort of an Excel file or a big long list of all the different items, all the different icons that they have, the names, descriptions, all that info. So we're going to right click and under miscellaneous, we have here a data table. So click on that. It's going to ask us to pick a structure. So if you remember, we created that S item info structure. So just select that and click OK. And then we'll name this to DT underscore items. So data table underscore items. So double click and open that up. And now you see we have up here on the row, we have all the infos that we created. So item ID, quantity, icon, name, description. So up here at the top, we have this add button, like a plus here. And then if we move this up, the window up here, you can see we have all the different variables now that we can set. So for our item ID, I'm going to leave this as 0. So we're going to start from 0 and go all the way up to, I think we have like 50 different items that we'll add throughout this course, but we'll start from 0, and then as we add another item, we'll set this to 1 and so on. Item quantity, you can just set this, leave this as 0. We're not going to really use it inside of here. But for our item icon, we're going to search for wood. We're going to add a wood item. So we have this texture underscore wood underscore 10 underscore B. So we set that there. And then for the item name, we can name this wood. In our item description, we can say a resource used for crafting various items. Item damage, it's not going to have any damage since it's a resource. Item rarity, you can leave this as common, but you can see we have that drop down where we can select, uncommon, rare, epic, or legendary. Item current HP, since this is a resource, it's not going to have any health or anything like that. If it was like a tool or something, it would have like 100 HP or whatnot. is stackable, we're going to click yes, so if they're true, so make sure that's checkbox. And the stack size, we'll set this to 100. So we have 100 wood per stack. For the item type, you can select the resource. Of course, we have, our different other item types like equipable, armor, consumable, or buildable item class reference. So for resources, you're not going to have an item class, but if we have like weapons and tools and stuff, that will have an actual item class. Okay. So armor type, we're not going to use this at all, so you just leave it at whatever. Helmet, I think, is the default, so you don't really mess with that. Use ammo, of course we're not going to use ammo since it's just a resource. So armor type, we're not going to use this at all, so you just leave it at whatever. Helmet is the default, so you don't even mess with that. Use ammo, of course we're not going to use ammo, it's just a resource. Current max ammo, just leave that as is. So now, we've added our very first item, and we're going to use this data table to add more different items as we get through this course. But basically, the thing that we've created a structure is a group of different variables. So you remember we have two integers here, for the icon. We have a text here for the name, description, and then we have things that are custom enumerations that give us these other option menus. So that is it for this lecture. In our next lecture, we're going to start by creating, I click inside of here, and what we want to create is a new blueprint class. Inventory. We're going to right click in action. So let's go ahead and get started. So the very first thing that we want to do is in our blueprints folder, we want to right click and create a new folder. We're going to name this to inventory. So I'm going to right click and set this to a new color. Just give this like a blue color for our folder. Because we're going to be using this folder a lot, or at least referencing back to it when we add more different functions to our inventory. So if we open this up, we can now right click inside of here, and what we want to create, it is a new blueprint class. So click on the blueprint class here. We want to create an actor component. So we want to then name this to VPC underscore items container. VPC, because a blueprint component underscore items container. So the items container is essentially our master item component class, and we're going to make children of this class, such as our player inventory, our hotbar, and our storage container. Now we can go ahead and double click and open this up. So now we're inside our VPC items container. What we want to do is add our inventory array. So if you don't know what an array is, I'll explain it here in a second. But to add that array, we can click on the variables here, add a new variable. We're going to name this to items. And for the variable type, we want to set it to our item structure that we made in our previous lecture. So s underscore item info, compile and save. And so right now, if you look at the default value, we have just a single item. So if you remember, we set things like the item icon, the ID, all that stuff. What we want to do right now is turn this into an array so that we can have multiple items other than just a single item. So to change this variable into an array, you go to the variable type. Over here on the very right, we have this drop down, and so we have a single variable, or an array. So we're going to select the array. And now if we compile and save this, you're going to see in the default value it looks a little bit different. Okay, we have 0 array elements, and then we have this plus button. So if we hit this plus button here, you can see that we've added a new array element, which is essentially just an item slot. So basically we can add, maybe 10 different item slots. So say we have an inventory and it's only 10 slots. So this is what you use the array for. You'd have each individual slot. Now you'll see that the array has an index. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 9. So the thing about arrays, and you'll find this very common in programming, is that an array starts at 0. There's 10 total array elements, but the counting, the index of the arrays will start at 0. So we just need to keep that in mind when we're using arrays. So now we have our very basic inventory. In fact, I'm going to delete all these slots because we're going to manually set them inside of our player inventory and our fault bar. So let's compile and save this, and let's go ahead and make the child blueprint class. But in our content browser here, we can now right-click this items container, and we can create a child blueprint class. So if we go ahead and do that, we'll create a new blueprint component, which is a child of this items container. So let's go ahead and rename this to BPC underscore player inventory. So if we open this up, so we have our BPC player inventory. So this will be our actual inventory component that will add to our character. And at the very top right, you're going to see that this is a parent class is our BPC items container. So the parent is this items container. And so in our inventory, you're going to notice that we don't have that items array variable, but it's actually still inside of this class. If you go over to the class inventory, so this will be our actual inventory component that will add to our character. And at the very top right, you're going to see that this is the parent class is our BPC items container. So the parent is this items container. And so in our inventory, you're going to notice that we don't have that is our BPC player inventory. So this will be our actual inventory component that will add to our character. And at the very top right, you're going to see that this is the parent class is our BPC items container. So the parent is this items container. And so in our inventory, you're going to notice that we don't have that items array variable, but it's actually still inside of this class. If you go over to the class defaults, right here at the top, in the details panel, you're going to see that we have, under the default, we have that items array. So we can add those item slots right inside of here. Now, we're going to just leave that as empty though. We're going to add those slots later on here. But right now we have our player inventory items container. Let's just go ahead and close our player inventory for now. That way we don't get too confused. So make sure you're in the items container, the actual parent. So here we have, our events, our event begin play, and our event tick. What we want to do is create a add item function, so we can add an item to our inventory or to our array. So we're going to first start out by creating two new functions. The very first function that we're going to create, so here at the top of functions, we'll click the plus button. The first function we're going to create is called find empty slot. Is create a add item function, so we can add an item to our inventory or to our array. So we're going to first start out by creating two new functions. The very first function that we're going to create, so here at the top of functions, we'll click the plus button. The first function we're going to create is called find empty slot. file and save that. The purpose of this function is to just take our items array and look through each slot and basically see if it is empty, if it has an item, or whatnot. Because to actually add an item, we have to make sure that is that inventory slot taken. If it isn't taken, then we can add an item. So we're working first on our find empty slot. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get our items array. And off of here, we want to do a for each loop, because to actually add an item, empty slot, or to our array. If you're confused, so make sure you're in the items container, the actual parent. So here we have, our events, our event begin play, and our event tick. What we want to do is create a add item function, so we can add an item to our inventory or to our array. So we're going to first start out by creating two new functions. The very first function that we're going to create, so here at the top of the functions, we'll put the purpose of this function is to just take our items array and look through each slot and basically see if it is empty, if it has an item, or whatnot. Because to add an item, we have to make sure that is that inventory slot taken. If it isn't taken, then we can add an item. So we're working first on our find empty slot. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get our items array. And off of here, we want to do a for each loop with break. So what this will do is it will do a loop that will check every single item slot, or in this case, array element, just check and see if the slot is empty. So we can drag off of this array element, and we can do this break s_item info. Now, whenever you break a structure, basically you're getting all of the variables inside of that structure. So if you remember our s_item info, we have all of the item variables like the ID, the name, description, all that stuff. And what we're going to use to see if this particular inventory slot is empty is we're going to use the item ID. And what I want to do is drag off here and check and see if this is equal. So drag off the integer and do it equals. We want to check and see if this is equal to 0. And then you can see that we get this boolean. So we can drag off here and do a branch. And then we can hook our loop body to our branch. So basically we're checking to see if our item ID is equal to 0. Because if it is equal to 0, that means that we've found an empty slot. Because we're going to use 0 as the empty slot indicator. Now, one thing I've just realized is then we can hook our loop body to our branch. So basically, we're checking to see if our item ID is equal to 0. Because if it is equal to 0, that means that we've found an empty slot. Because we're going to use 0 as the empty slot indicator. Now, one thing I've just realized is we actually have an item ID that is set to 0. So we might want to change that here real quick. Data table, dt_items. We have this item ID, our very first item that we made, set to 0. Let's change that to 1 for now. So instead of using 0 as the first one, we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So that way we can use 0 as the ID for being an empty item. Okay, so now that we've found that empty slot, what we want to do is take this array index. Because the array index tells us basically where inside of the array is this empty slot located. So take this array, we want to promote this to a local variable. Click on that. We want to change this name to empty slot index. Okay, and hook that up for the true. So if you don't know what a local variable is, essentially all that it is a variable that is only accessible inside of this function. That way if we go like out to the event graph, you don't see that local variable. And we're going to be using local variables a lot throughout all the functions that we create. That way we don't have all of these variables out here and sort of like one-time use nodes. That way you don't have a bunch of variables in memory. So we have our empty slot right here. We want to do one more thing, which is create another local variable, and we want to name this to found empty slot question mark. And we want to change the type to a boolean. And we want to change this from an array. We don't want an array, we want a single boolean. So we want to take this found empty slot and set it and hook it up like so and hit that little checkbox. So basically if the item ID is equal to 0, this means that we found an empty slot and we want to set that slot index so we can save it. Then we want to break out of this loop because this will loop through every single type to a boolean. And we want to change this from an array. We don't want an array, we want a single boolean. So we want to take this found empty slot and set it and hook it up like so and hit that little checkbox. So basically if the item ID is equal to 0, this means that we found an empty slot and we want to set that slot index so we can save it. Then we want to break out of this loop. This will loop through every single item slot in our inventory. Just take this execution pin and hook it up to the break. So basically if the item ID is equal to 0, this means that we found an empty slot and we want to set that slot index so we can save it. Then we want to break out of this loop because this will loop through every single item slot in our inventory. Just take this execution pin and hook it up to the break. Then we want to add some reroute nodes, so just double click on the node here. Double click and it will add a reroute node which you can use to reposition these item slot in our inventory. Just take this execution pin and hook it up to the break. And we want to add some reroute nodes, so just double click on the node here. That will add a new output variable. So make sure that's set to a boolean. We want to change this to success question mark. Add a new output variable and change this to an integer. We want to name this to empty index. So we'll drag this return down here. The complete, we can hook that up like so. Success index. So we'll drag this return down here. Off the complete, we can hook that up like so. Then all we have to do is get these two variables, hook them up. So get our found empty slot, hook that up, and then get our empty slot index and hook that to the empty index. Okay, so compile and save that. And again, all this function is doing is finding an empty slot. So it's looking through every single item index inside of our array, is doing a loop, checking to see if that item ID is equal to 0. Because okay, so compile and save that. And again, all this function is doing is finding an empty slot. So it's looking through every single item index inside of our array, is doing a loop, checking to see if that item ID is equal to 0. Because if it is, that means that we have an empty slot. If so, we want to save that array index. We want to set, we found an empty slot, set that to true. Then we want to go ahead and break out of this loop. That array is doing a loop, checking to see if that item ID is equal to 0. Because if it is, that means that we have an empty slot. If so, we want to save that array index. We want to set, we found an empty slot, set that to true. Then we want to go ahead and break out of this loop so that we can complete and return with our empty slot that we found. and the slot index that we found. So that is our very simple empty slot function. The next function that we want to make is just an add item. We'll add a new function here. We want to name this to add item. So our add item, we want to add an input because we're going to be using this function over and over. So it's going to be a very popular function that we use because, when we add an item, whether that's through, harvesting a rock or a resource, we're going to use this function. If we're crafting something, we're going to use the add item function because we're going to add a new item that you've crafted. So we're going to be using this function a lot, and we'll revisit it later on in other lectures. But right now we're just going to set up some really simple add item logic. For our add item function, we just need one input. So click the plus button for our input here, and we want to change the variable type to s_item info, and just leave it as a single variable. We don't need like an array or anything like that, and we name this to item. If we're crafting something, we're going to use the add item function. So we're going to add a new item that you crafted. So we're going to be using this function a lot, and we'll revisit it later on in other lectures. But right now we're just going to set up some really simple add item logic. For our add item function, we just need one input. So click the plus button for our input here, and we want to change the variable type to s_item info, and just leave it as a single variable. We don't need like an array or anything like that, and we name this to item. So this is the item that we want to add, okay? Then what we want to do is drag off of that item and promote this to a local variable. So we can rename this to local item info. And so this will be useful, that way we can hook it up to whatever nodes that we need to later on. We don't have to drag off here. So now we want to call our find empty slot to basically check and see if we have an empty slot that we can add this item to. So take that function, drag and drop it onto the graph, and open up the execution pins like so. And so off the success here, we want to do a boolean. We want to do a branch. So we want to check and see, did we find an empty slot? Okay. And so if so, we want to take this empty index, promote this to a local variable. We'll go ahead and name this local empty index. We can hook that up to be true here. Then what we want to do is we want to get our items array. And now what we want to do is we want to add this item. Because we found an empty slot, we've done that loop. And if we're successful, we want to get that index of where the slot is empty, and we want to add it to this array. Okay, we want to take this item info and add it to this array. So the node that we'll use for that is, if you drag off here, you want to do set array element. Set array element, or short for set array element. So you can see we have things like the target array, which is our items. Hook that up. For the index, we'll use this local empty index. And in fact, we'll just drag the local empty index and hook it up like so. So we're adding the item. So we want to take this local item info and get that and hook it up to the array. So now you can see we're getting the items array. And we're setting the array element at this empty index. We're setting it to this local item info that we are adding to our inventory. So hopefully that all makes sense, but we'll see it here in action here in just a couple seconds. Then what we want to do is we want to add a return node for a function. So click on the add item here, and on the outputs we want to add a new variable. And the output variable, we want to change this to a boolean. So we want to check and see if this function was successful. So just rename this to success, question mark. And we can drag this at the very end here and hook this up and click this checkbox because we've successfully added our item to our array. We also want to select this turn node, copy, and paste it down here, and hook this up to false, because if we did not find an empty slot, we want to uncheck this and return as false. So we weren't successful in adding this item. So let's go ahead and see this all in. Now we're going to add a key on our keyboard that our player can press. And what we'll do is we'll just add one wood item to our inventory just to see if this is all working. So in our content folder, we want to go to our blueprints main actually. And one thing I want to do real quick is I want to move this first person character inside of this blueprints folder rather than having it out here in the main, because the main is sort of for widgets, textures, meshes, all that sort of stuff, and I think it's the blueprints, so it should belong in the blueprints folder. Let's go ahead and just move here and right click the content folder. So whenever you move like a blueprint class like that, that may or may not have things referenced to it, you want to right click in your content folder and do fix up redirectors in folder. And so that will just clean up like the references to those different blueprints. Now we have our character inside of this blueprints folder, and that will just make it easier to access and get to it. Let's go ahead and open this class up. So we want to add our inventory component inside of our character now. So if we click this add button, we want to search for our player VPC underscore player inventory. You don't want to add the items container because the items, we want to search for our player VPC underscore player inventory. You don't want to add the items container. So right click anywhere here in your blueprint graph and add a 1 key. So just type in 1 key. So when we press 1 on our keyboard, we're going to call this item function. Before we get far ahead of ourselves, we want to go into our items container here. A single slot in our inventory. So we can unexpand the items there. 30 array elements. I'll save that. So now that we have our 30 slots, or 30 inventory slots, we're going to add that debug key on a keyboard that we can press. What we'll do is we'll just add an item and call that add item function. So right click anywhere here in your blueprint graph and add a 1 key. So just type in 1 key. So when we press 1 on our keyboard, we're going to call this add item function. Before we get far ahead of ourselves, we want to go into our items container here. Out of these functions, so we can close out of these. In our event graph inside of our items container, let's go ahead and delete the event begin playing tick. We don't need those. We want to add a new event inside of our container, so right click and type in add custom event. So a custom event is primarily used for, well, really any sort of event. You remember we have the event begin play that is fired when the game starts. All that a custom event is just an event that we can program any sort of logic behind this execution pin. And what we want to name this event to is add item on server. And we want to use this event to add items on the server rather than adding items on the client. That way we can prevent things like cheating. So we will be using more of these later on throughout this course. So we don't have to necessarily worry about not understanding the principles behind this. But really quick, let's go ahead and select this. We want to set over in this details panel, we have an option for replicates. So you want to do this, you click this drop down and set it to run on server. So basically we're going to run this event only on the server. That way our players can call this event on the client and add whatever items that they want. Now we need to add an input here, so click on the plus icon here. And for our input, we're going to choose our s_item info. You want to change the name here to item. Save that, and now we can call our add item function. So if we drag and drop that on the graph, we can hook up the execution pin and then hook up the item to the item that we want to add. So now we can call this event in our character class when we press the 1 key. Now you're probably wondering, how do we access this event? And since we have this component here, you can actually take this component and drag it onto your graph, and then you have this reference here. So this reference allows us to call any sort of function or event that's inside of this class. So we want to call this add item on server. So all you have to do is drag off here and do add item on server. Now you probably saw that we could do this other one, the add item. We don't want to do that one because that's just the add item function rather than this add item event that happens on the server. So now we want to add an item here, where all of our items are stored inside of this _items, this data table. So we want to go ahead and get that item from this data table and add it here. So let's go ahead and move this over like so. And all we need to do to get this item is we want to right click and do a get data table row. And so get data table row, we want to select our data table that we want to get, and for the row name corresponds to this row name value. And I believe the table row, we want to select our data table that we want to get, and for the row name corresponds to this row name value. And I believe I usually just set this to the item ID. So if the item ID is 1, I rename this row name to 1. Save that. So now we have the row name, we can select item 1. So we hook this data table up like so. Basically we're getting this data table and getting the item at row number 1. Or what I like to say is the item ID that's equal to 1, which in our case is this wood item. So now off of the out row, we can hook this up into the item that we want to add. And then off of the row found, we can hook this up to the add item on server. Okay, so if we find this item in our data table, we want to add that item to our player's inventory. So now if we were to, off of the out row, the item at row number 1. So basically we're getting this data table and getting the item at row number 1. Or what I like to say is the item ID that's equal to 1, which in our case is this wood item. So now off of the out row, we can hook this up into the item that we want to add. And then off of the row found, we can hook this up to the add item on server. Okay, so if we find this item in our data table, we want to add that item to our player's inventory. So now if we were to go ahead and play, I'm going to set this to 1 client, make sure that is set to play as client. We hit play here, press 1. You can see that nothing happens in the game. We can't actually see the inventory or the item being added, so I can spam 1 as many times as I want. We can't actually see what's going on. So to actually see what's going on, if we go in our container here, if you open up the add item function, we have this items array reference. So this is our items array. And a neat thing about blueprints is you can watch the value of any variable inside of your blueprint. In fact, you can also watch the code being executed. So we can do that by right-clicking on this pin right here. And we want to do this, watch this value. Okay, so this will show us the actual items inside of this array. So if we hit this play window right here, and if you put your window over to the left, now we want to, under this no debug object selected, you want to select, you're going to see we have these two different options. We have our player inventory and our BP first person character server spawn. We want to select that reference right there. So now what you're going to see is all the different items or all the different slots inside of this items array. And if you remember correctly, inside of our character player inventory, we've added 30 different array elements. But right now this is showing us 30 different array elements, which are all set to all the default values. So everything's set to none. But right now, if we have the window here, if we put
बोल
कहा था कब से बोला
एक मिनट रुको क्या कितना ले क्यों नहीं करने दे गया कब से बोला हेलो
कहा कब से बोला
मैं बोलना वॉशरूम करता
कुछ नहीं आ रहा था मैं सर्वर में तो पूछा तो
लॉक्स के लिए एरिया बना रहा हूँ
क्या बढ़ा रहा है
लॉक्स जिसको टेम किया ना लॉक्स को टेम किया है मैंने 6-7 लॉक्स को उसके लिए एरिया बढ़ा रहा हूँ मैं ज़्यादा टाइम दे सकता
बोल रहा है
कहाँ पे बोला
यार और भी लोग चाहिए मैं सोच रहा हूँ अपना सर्वर पब्लिक डाल दूँ आने दे लोगों को कुछ चैलेंज तो आएगा।
चलेगा अपने को सिटी बनाने का था ब्रो, वो एक
तो आने देना लोग, थोड़ा कुछ तो अपोजिंग फोर्सेस भी चाहिए ना ब्रो।
भाई अपने ये भी तो है ना।
क्या करेंगे, वो तोड़ देंगे फिर अपन नया बनाएंगे। गेम चलता रहेगा। अभी देखिए तू 2-3 बॉस को ही मार दिया तो गेम में मजा ही क्या, फिर जो भी है क्रिएटिव मोड ही रहेगा।
तो तब करेंगे ना पब्लिक, अभी करने का क्या, बोर होने लगा तब करेंगे। अभी तो अभी नया एडवेंचर अपने को एक्सप्लोर करना है।
क्या पता आप अपने साथ भी मिलके वो लोग हेल्प भी कर सकते हैं, दोस्त भी बन जाए। फिर ज्यादा कुछ किया मस्ती तो क्या किक कर दे रहे हो, अपने अपना ही सर्वर है।
और किसी शाने ने आके अपना ये सर्वर हैक किया तो
नहीं करेगा।
नहीं करेंगे नहीं।
क्या करेगा, आईपी चेंज नया सर्वर, सेव फाइल तो है मेरे पास। मेरे कंप्यूटर में तो नहीं घुसेगा ना, घुस भी सकता है मेरे पास। आंटी आंटी मांग रहा है। आ जाओ बता।
आ जाता है तो।
अभी मैं कहा हूँ, तू कहाँ है देख।
हाँ ब्रो।
ब्रो मैं यहाँ आया कैसे, मैं कैसे आऊँ?
उड़ के लास्ट टाइम
अबे
से तो
यार।
एग्जिट किया था अपन ने।
हाँ बट मैं वापस कैसे आऊँ, ये तूने बताया नहीं मेरे को। मेरे मैप में बेस भी नहीं दिख रहा यहाँ से पोर्टल का।
अच्छा रुक मैं आता तेरे पास। अरे इधर
एक बार
है किधर। हाँ इधर है ना, बेस इधर है। इधर ये साइड पे भाग गया, ये साइड पे भाग गया, ये साइड पे भाग गया, ये साइड से, ये साइड से भाग गया। यहाँ पर है बेस।
एक बार वापस मार्क करेगा। अबे भाई भाई, स्पाइडर स्पाइडर।
भाग उससे मत ये कर, पंगा मत ले।
तेरा लगता है मैं डरता हूँ? हाँ
तो क्यों मार।
भाई को कितना स्पीड आ रहा है भाई, एक नहीं दो नहीं 3 स्पाइडर है। अभी स्पाइडर नहीं है तो
वो अलग तरह का कीड़ा है ना।
अभी उड़ता है ये कीड़ा।
हाँ उड़ता है,
मतलब
बिच्छू है।
मॉस्किटो और
बिच्छू है, बिच्छू, बिच्छू बोलते हैं उसको।
चुप रहे, बिच्छू बिच्छू मैं मर रहा हूँ उसका देख।
अरे बिच्छू है वो,
उड़ने वाला बिच्छू।
हाँ उड़ने वाला बिच्छू। उड़ते पता है ना देखो।
बिच्छू क्या होता है ये नहीं पता।
बिच्छू रे दोस्त है बिच्छू।
अबे बिच्छू मतलब वो होता है पागल, स्कॉर्पियो। स्कॉर्पियो को बिच्छू बोलते हैं, स्कॉर्पियो थोड़ी ना उड़ते हैं कुछ भी। भाई ये इनको कैसे मारने का, वो मॉस्किटो से फट जाती थी।
सिंपल है, मैं तीन बिच्छू को मारा मैं।
जल्दी आता है क्या उनका हेल्थ?
नहीं लेट जाता है बट टाइम लगता है, डिफिकल्ट नहीं है।
मॉस्किटो ज्यादा डेडली है ना?
क्या बोल रही माँ?
वापस मार्क कर। सही जा रहा देख। अबे यार ट्रोल आया। मैं ट्रोल से क्या डर रहा हूँ, मैं ट्रोल तो ऐसे ही मारता हूँ ब्रेकफास्ट। पर ट्रोल तो मजाक बन के रह गया है बे तब्बू।
बहुत।
इतना बड़ा और डरावना दिखता है सामने।
वो बोलता रहेगा मेरा कुछ वजूद ही नहीं है गेम में।
क्या करूं मैं मर जाऊं? मर जाऊं। भाई उसको मारने का मौका ही नहीं देते हम। मर जाता है वो सामने लिटरली। अगर उनमें थोड़ा सेंस और लॉजिक होता ना, हम लोग को देख के वो भाग जाते। एक बार हम लोग ने एड गियर हाथ में लिया ना, ऐसे टर्न लेके भाग जाना चाहिए। आता क्या है, भाग करना बोल मैं सीधा।
हाँ तो गया तू इधर ही।
हाँ तो क्या जान लेगा बच्चे की। तेरे इसमें बेस दिख रहा है क्या? मार्क कर वापस, मैं यहाँ पे सेव करता हूँ वो बेस पे कर, पिन कर।
तू घर पे आके कार्टोग्राफी टेबल रीड करते वो सब मेरे दिखे।
कोई किया हुआ है।
और करना।
ठीक है बचा। पानी में वाटर कैसे यूज करते हैं ब्रो? वाटर कैसे यूज करते हैं?
बैठने का बस जाते हैं।
कुछ ई भी नहीं दबाओ।
सीट करने का रहेगा तो बैठने का रहेगा तो ई दबा।
ई दबाओ।
हाँ यहाँ दिमाग
एक बार
में
ऑप्शन
आया।
नहीं आ रहा ई दबाओ।
वो सीट आउट है ना, उस पर क्लिक कर, वहाँ पे देखना तो कुछ समझेगा।
टू फार। कपड़े निकाले पड़ते हैं क्या?
नहीं ऐसा कुछ नहीं है।
हाँ। अभी ई बैठने का ऑप्शन ही नहीं आ रहा। टू फार करके आ रहा है।
बताता रुक।
हाँ अभी हुआ अभी हुआ।
आओ क्या?
क्या लाइफ है। मौजा ही मौजा। ये वुल्फ सारे हंग्री बता रहे हैं ब्रो। क्या खिलाएगा उनको? हाँ
क्या करना है पता है क्या? इधर आ बताता।
अरे नहाने भी नहीं देता शांति, काम काम काम, कितना काम करेगा आदमी।
क्या नहा रहा है? नहा के क्या मिल रहा है?
नहा के हम फ्रेश रहते हैं, चमड़ी गोरी हो जाती है, लड़कियां मिलेंगी ब्रो। क्या मैं किससे बात कर रहा हूँ? शादीशुदा जिसका बच्चा हो रहा है क्या यार तुम।
लड़कियों से लोग बर्बाद हो गए भाई, संतुलन खत्म हुए, इतना है भाई, संतुलन। इधर आ, ये देख कितने सारे लॉक्स टेम हुए हैं।
भाई ये तो कैसल बना दिया तूने, अपने घर से बेटर तो ये लग रहा है। मैं इधर ही रहूंगा,
इधर आ, इधर आ।
मंदिर यही बनेगा।
ये देख, सही है ना?
बाप रे कितने सारे हो गए ब्रो, इनके बच्चे हो गए क्या?
बच्चे हो गए।
मस्त बे।
इधर आ, वो छोड़, वो अभी हटा, इधर आ।
पैजू भाई
आना
लॉक्सी।
जल्दी बाहर आ।
रुकना, ये इनके के पीछे फंस गया मैं, देखना। अंडरग्राउंड रास्ता बनाना है, ऐसे ऊपर नीचे से टनल से जाके ऊपर आना चाहिए।
इसका
मस्त ना?
कंफर्ट 17 करना है इनको। कंफर्ट 17 कैसा करेगा अभी तू?
कितना है अभी?
3 लोग है। कंफर्ट देखना 11 है ऊपर।
ओ तो वो बाथटब डाल।
बाथटब कैसा लगाएगा?
17 पे टीम होते हैं क्या वो लोग?
क्या मालूम। हाँ लॉक पे थे।
और क्या डालेगा, और क्या है फर्नीचर में देख। ये लगा दे हेयर रग।
चलो वो सब बाद में लगाएंगे, इधर आ, पहले अपने काम करने जाने का। छुरी मत मारा, मारेंगे वो लोग। इधर आ, और एक दिक्कत है।
तो ये लकड़े के घर से पूरा लकड़े का घर तोड़ के ये बना ना, स्टोन का कंफर्ट बढ़ेगा।
वो प्लानिंग करना है ठीक से।
वही तोड़ के बस ए यार, वो इसमें ना रस जैसा वो अपग्रेड का ऑप्शन होना चाहिए, डायरेक्ट अपग्रेड करो।
इधर आ, इधर 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 आ। खोल मत इसको, इसको खोल मत, इसको खोल मत।
क्यों?
मच्छर है इसमें, टेम होने के लिए रखा है।
ऐसा किया बे? मच्छर पकड़ना मतलब तो आप इनको टेम करके क्या ही फायदा बर? इनके ऊपर बैठ सकते हैं क्या? अबे तो उड़ने वाला बिच्छू है, उस पे बैठ सकते हैं शायद।
बट उसको टेम कैसा करेगा?
जैसा अभी मॉस्किटो को पकड़ लिया तो उसको भी पकड़ ही लेंगे।
चल देख लेते हैं।
अबे
इसको मत जाइए, टेम नहीं हुआ ये। हट वहाँ से, डरता है वो।
मैं कूदने वाला था उसमें। अच्छा
टेम
बाबा
टेम हो गया, टेम हो गया वो। अबे 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 नहीं हुआ, नहीं हुआ। मारा 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 मारा
तभी मैं घर आ रहा था वो।
मारा।
बच गया भाई। झूठे मेरे को लगा सही में टेम हुआ है। अभी तोड़ रहा है सब कुछ।
हट वहाँ से, दूर हट।
अभी तोड़ दिया उस तरफ का।
दूर हट बोला तो। हाँ शांत हो गया, आजा इधर आ, पीछे से घूम के आजा, बेस में आजा।
अभी तोड़ रहा है वो। तो अब रिपेयर नहीं करेगा?
करना।
रिपेयर कैसे करते? बीच वाला बटन ना?
बीच वाला नहीं, बीच वाला तोड़ते हैं।
कैसे क्लिक करो ना?
क्लिक कर सिर्फ, हैमर लगा दो। आ इधर, अरे चला जा उससे दूर, अपने आप को शांत हो जाएगा।
चल बोल।
चल मिस आइलैंड एक्सप्लोर करते हैं, या हंट के लिए जाना है। सिल्वर कम है अपने पास, सिल्वर ज़्यादा मांगता अपने को।
सिल्वर कहाँ मिलता है?
सिल्वर माउंटेन्स पे मिलते हैं।
चल
माउंटेन हंट के लिए जाना है या मिस आइलैंड हंट के लिए जाना है?
चल बस नहीं, माउंटेन ही चलते हैं। सिल्वर और वो फ्रोजन ग्लैंड भी चाहिए ना एरोस के लिए।
चाहिए तो सही, बट
अबे क्या लैग हो रहा है? Valheim की फाइल्स यूज करके मैं थोड़ा से अपग्रेड करूंगा।
भाई लॉक्स पाइप करने के लिए 105 मिनट का ये मिलता है।
मैं तो दोपहर को आया तब तक वो मेरा ही है। पता नहीं है खाना कैसे बढ़ गया, मैंने तो नहीं बढ़ाया था लास्ट टाइम। ट्रॉल मीट खाएगा?
बना
क्या तब वो ट्रॉल मीट होता भी नहीं है तो क्या बना सकता
है ना ऊपर। अच्छा ट्रॉल मीट, मेरे को लगा लॉक्स मीट बोला तू। ट्रॉल फिश मिली है, पता है क्या तेरे को?
ट्रॉल फिश?
हाँ इधर है, बताता।
हेयर मीट है तो कॉलरन में डालता हूँ।
इधर है, इधर इधर है।
कहाँ है तू? आया और तू है नहीं इधर। भाई हेयर मीट किस पे बनाते हैं?
इधर है।
ओवन में डालू क्या?
नहीं नीचे जलाते उसको, बारबेक्यू करते। बारबेक्यू
नहीं बोले, नहीं बोलता है वो।
दिखा, ये ले फिश देख, ट्रोल फिश पीछे तेरे।
ट्रॉल फिश, रॉ फिश। भाई फिशिंग कैसे किया? मेरे को भी नहीं पता फिशिंग।
हेयर मीट किस पे कुक करने का है? हाँ इस पे फिर बनाने का। अबे ये देखना, हो तो रहा है, ऊपर वाले इस पे लगा, ये ले।
अभी लगा ना तू ही। फिश भी उधर लगाओ क्या?
हाँ लगा।
उधर लगता नहीं है।
जलने वाला तू, तेरी हेल्थ कम हो रही है।
ब्रो उधर लग ही नहीं रहा है। बट फिश किस पे कुक करते हैं? कॉलरन में। भाई ट्रॉल फिश कुक ही नहीं हो रहा, ओवन में डालू क्या?
ला इधर दे मेरे को, मैं करता।
भाई नहीं हो रहा, बोल तो रहा हूँ।
तो शायद अपने को सूप भी बनाने के लिए लगता है ये रख।
मस्त लग रहा है ये मूर्ति इधर का। इसमें सही में बिजली गिरती है क्या रे?
ट्रॉल आया है। चला निकलते हंट को, क्या कर रहा है?
इसको चला ना, मेरे को देखना है।
इधर है ना, इसका पुल कर लीवर राइट साइड में।
किया।
देखो पता है कि नीडल एरो से भी ज्यादा डैमेज होता है।
भाई इसमें इतना सारा सामान था, तूने लिया क्या? गया किधर?
जल गया वो।
काफी सामान था उसमें, फालतू ही था बट फिर भी मेरे को लगा उसको कन्वर्ट कर देगा, ये तो पूरा डिस्ट्रॉय कर देता है वो।
बता क्या करना है, मिस आइलैंड एक्सप्लोर करना है या माउंटेन हिल के लिए निकलना है?
भाई तू तो पूरा ऑडिट हो गया बे, दाढ़ी वाड़ी। ये नया कैरेक्टर बनाया क्या तूने?
नहीं, हाँ नया कैरेक्टर।
देव मेरे को सीखना है, मेरा कैरेक्टर थोड़ा दे कुछ।
तू बोल पहले क्या करना है। चल ना मिस आइलैंड एक्सप्लोर करते हैं।
तो खा के जाता हूँ, पता नहीं कितना हो गया।
चल
और केव्स और डंजन्स डालने चाहिए उनको, मजा आता है केव और
डाले होंगे अपने को, एक्सप्लोर करना पड़ेगा।
भाई वो डिवाइड कैसे होता था? कोई चीज को डिवाइड करनी है तो
शिफ्ट
नहीं हो रहा है। अच्छा हो तब राइट।
या यगलुत को मारने का है। हाँ अपने को सिल्वर एरो बनाने के थे, नीडल एरो बनाने के थे और फ्रॉस्ट एरो बनाने के थे यगलुत को मारने के लिए।
इतना क्यों रे?
कहाँ पे तू?
रूम में बैठ।
तो फिर जाएंगे, चल अभी।
और अब कैसे चल रहा था? तब्बू जॉब वॉब कैसे चलता है?
क्या चलता है?
जॉब कैसे चलता है?
ठीक है, एक्सपीरियंस मिल रहा है। अरे वोट देना साले।
मेरे पास कहाँ से? आजू बाजू बड़ी गुड़ पड़ा है।
चल आ रहा हूँ।
तू कर क्या रहा है उधर?
बेड बना रहा है।
क्यों तेरा बेड कहाँ गया?
छोड़ दो। मत ना मारते बेड, चल मिसा नहीं। माउंटेन पे से चल, सिल्वर मिलता है क्या देखो। क्या बंदरों की तरह उड़ी मार मार के जा रहा है।
सिल्वर सिल्वर तो ये सिल्वर है क्या?
नहीं।
अबे फुलिंग क्या कर रहा है इतना ऊपर? फुलिंग तो कुछ क्या ही है। केव दिख रहा है ये में?
नहीं ना।
और फिर चल।
गलत जा रहे अपन।
लीड द वे सर। सही तो जा रहा है।
सामने देख के।
क्या है?
मच्छर। मच्छर को मार के आया रुकना। तो कोई भी मच्छर नहीं लगा रास्ते में?
नहीं
लगा, बट तेरे पीछे मैं हूं ना, इसीलिए मेरे को पकड़ रहा हूँ अभी।
हाँ एक दिखा मेरे को लेफ्ट साइड में। अभी भी आया। तो ये वाले बायोम में नहीं आएंगे ना?
आएंगे
इसमें शिफ्ट कर।
आते। मरना मत।
बहुत सही है। मेरे को नहीं समझा इन लोगों ने कैसे किया, बट मेरे को ये चाहिए। इनका बायोम जो मिक्स होता है ना, उनके स्काइज भी मिक्स होते हैं। क्या प्रिटी लगता है यार, ऐसा कोई गेम में नहीं होता। बहुत सही है, कुछ तो यूनिक है।
अच्छा, अरे एक नीचे नया कीड़ा है।
ठीक है, अबे वो एक स्टार वाला है ये तो ब्रो।
उसका कलर देखना।
नया कीड़ा यही पीछे पड़ा था मेरे। तो फिर मैं पीछे भाग रहा हूँ।
नीचे 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 मार दे उसको, इधर आ। रुक मैं लेके आता हूँ,
नहीं जा।
start कर।
मार दिया।
वाह,
कोई और एरो ट्राई कर। हो ये वाले सही है। फ्रोज आयरन से ज्यादा मरते हैं वे। 100 हेल्थ गया उसका। मरा। फ्रीज हो गया। क्या मिला?
कुछ नहीं हुआ,
कुछ नया अनलॉक हुआ?
नया नहीं मिला। भाई आवाज किसकी है? कुछ मॉन्स्टर जैसा लग रहा है आवाज।
चल आवाज की तरफ हेडफोन नहीं कर रहा, वो डायरेक्शन नहीं समझ रहा। चलो और अंदर अंदर जाते हैं, देखते क्या होता है।
देखा?
और बीच में इतना आवाज करता है। नहीं नहीं और मेरा साउंड क्या हट जाएगा ऐसा लग रहा है।
क्या फटेगा?
मेरा मेरा, मेरा सीपीयू के बीच में बहुत जोर से आवाज करने लगा, बहुत जोर से जोर।
सीपीयू आवाज कर रहा है, गेम से आवाज आ रहा है।
अरे इधर है, कौन है? जल्दी आ मेरी तरफ, और मेरे पीछे से आ, मेरे पीछे साइड से ही आ। हाँ वही से आ। रुका, मैं जा खड़ा वहीं पे रुक और छुप के रहे, नीचे छुप, उनके
हाँ,
सामने मत जा।
ये
कर गया। टीपी ले।
दो लोग है भाई।
हाँ ले, तू राइट को ले, मैं लेफ्ट को लेता हूँ।
बस रुक, पहले सामने जा, देखते क्या है।
हमार मत पहले
नॉर्समैन है।
देख, बात करे ना तेरे से।
Who goes there?
मार मत उनको, तो वो भी नहीं मारेंगे। देख मैं बोला ना, लास्ट टाइम भी वो आया था आदमी, तेरे से पहले बात किया हो, फिर मारने लग गया। इनसे इंटरैक्ट कैसे करे?
पता नहीं। कौन है लोग? इनका क्या कर सकते हैं इनके साथ?
देखते फॉलो करते हैं।
नहीं कर सकते, नहीं कर रहे।
हाँ भाई, अपना काम से काम रख रहे।
हाँ मारना है उनको, बट उससे मिलने वाला क्या अपने को? पता नहीं, कुछ आगे यूज आएगा। बाद में आएंगे मारने। क्या लिखा था? बी केयरफुल।
अपने को हेल्प कर रहे हो। खत्म हो गया मुस्लिम।
चल सिल्वर ढूंढते।
कोई तो है यहाँ पे। ओए ओए मॉस्किटो बेबी। भाई मेरी हेल्प कर।
मैं आ रहा हूँ। तू क्यों चला जाता है मेरे को अकेले छोड़?
लग मर गया मैं।
मर गया?
अबे वो क्या बोलते हैं, पर्पल कीड़ा है और दो पर्पल कीड़ा है और 2 मॉस्किटो एक साथ आ रहे हैं। और वो जो 2 लोगों ने अपन छोड़ा था ना, उन लोग को मार दे।